It was the second Sunday of September, 1839, when 12-year-old Eli Cooper stumbled upon the first body, though many in Barrowfell would later swear it was the third. The boy had been sent to gather stones to weigh down the churchyard's new canvas awnings. A freak squall had blown through the northern fields overnight, unsettling even the most rooted things. The ground was damp but not soft. The air held that sharp, metallic smell that comes just before the first frost. Not quite death, but something colder. Eli was humming a nonsense tune when his boot caught on something too smooth for a root and too pale for a stone. He fell. When he turned, the hum stopped. It was a man, or had been. His mouth was open, lips dried in a stiff half-gasp. His left eye was still intact, bulging and bloodshot, but the rest, dear God, the rest, had been peeled. Not butchered. Peeled, not a strip of clothing, not a hint of fur or hair. Every inch of his skin, gone, not hacked, not burned, removed. But even stranger, there was no blood. Not in the soil, not on the field grass, not even inside the corpse, whose muscles were preserved with a precision that the local doctor would later call impossible without divine patience or satanic art. The boy screamed so loud that the crows leapt from the distant hedgerows, and within 2 hours the constable, the vicar, and half the town had gathered around the flayed man. No one recognized him. No one claimed him. He had no boots, no documents, no jewelry. Only a brass buckle beside his foot, engraved faintly, W.H. Tsars, 1833. The vicar muttered a prayer in Latin. Constable Garvey removed his hat and said nothing, and old Mrs. Flannery, who lived nearest to the field, stared not at the corpse but at the sky. She whispered, "Again." Someone heard her. She denied it, but the town had already begun to remember what it had spent 20 years trying to forget. The field where the body was found was known locally as the Hollow, though the church registry listed it as Parcel 9B. It had no official use. No one grazed sheep there. No one harvested. And though the soil was rich, black, and even yielded wild barley in patches, the field had remained untouched for decades, except by wind and rumor. Local legend whispered that during the tail end of the Napoleonic Wars, deserters had camped there, and something unnatural had driven them mad. Others claimed it had once been a sacred execution ground for witches, though no records survived to prove it. In 1819, 2 children vanished near the field. Their shoes were found a week later, laced neatly on the hollow's edge. A decade later, a woman's scream was heard one night by passing travelers, but no body was found. Just 2 deep claw-like gouges in the bark of a sycamore, as if something had clung to it in terror or glee. Still, the town chose not to talk about it, until now. By dusk that day, the body had been moved to the cold room behind St. Olwyn's. Dr. Horace Bell, the parish physician, 49, balding, known for a skeptical tongue, was summoned reluctantly. He refused to touch the body at first. Not from fear, he insisted, but confusion. "There's no sign of decomposition," he said. "No putrefaction, no gas, no scent. It's as though the man had been emptied of life, yes, but not by death. By something more precise." "Explain," said Garvey, arms crossed, trying to remain the pillar of order. Bell removed his gloves. "There are no cut marks. No flay knife could do this. The tissue is peeled uniformly, even along difficult curves, the elbows, the scalp. Whoever did this didn't tear. They lifted. Like a glove." He paused. Swallowed. "The only trauma I found, if you can call it that, is beneath the fingernails. Dirt. Fresh. Like he was trying to dig. Garvey frowned. "Out of something?" Bell didn't answer. He only added that the man's organs were intact. Preserved. There was no evidence of embalming. "Then what in God's name did this?" the constable muttered. From the shadowed door, a thin voice offered a reply. The field. Everyone turned. It was Mrs. Flannery again. Her hands trembled as she clutched a thick shawl. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, as if watching two timelines at once. "You think this is the first," she whispered. "But I remember 1819. I was 10. The Hollow took them too, but it doesn't take at random." "What does it take?" Bell asked, his voice surprisingly soft. She stared at the body. The marked. By nightfall, the field had been cordoned off with makeshift stakes and butcher's twine. That did not stop the whispers, nor the smell. It came just after midnight. Several townsfolk who lived near the Hollow reported a stench, like old meat soaked in vinegar and coal. Others said it was sweet, like roses, gone bad. And the sound, more felt than heard. A distant dragging, wet and slow, the kind of sound that makes children wake crying without knowing why. In the following days, no family reported a missing man. The constable sent word to neighboring villages and the magistrate in Wexley. No response returned for a week. The roads were unusually muddy. A few brave young men attempted to sleep in shifts near the field, hoping to catch any prowlers. On the third night, one of them, Simon Carrick, a cobbler's apprentice, fled screaming from his post and refused to speak. He later bit off part of his tongue and tried to hang himself from his mother's attic rafter. Dr. Bell sedated him, but before the boy slipped under, he whispered only one word: "Underneath." By the week's end, the brass buckle was sent to Wexley's records clerk in hopes of tracing W.H. The body remained unnamed. But something else had changed. The field was growing, not in width, but in depth. The Hollow seemed deeper, subtly, imperceptibly, but surely. One elderly shepherd swore his stone marker had sunk 2 inches overnight. Others stopped walking past the field altogether. Even the birds avoided it, and beneath the churned soil, small insects began to surface. Beetles with translucent shells and red veins visible underneath. They moved slowly, never in daylight. Bell collected 3. By morning, the jars were empty, and no glass was broken. Still, life in Barrow Fell pretended to return to normal. That was the way things survived here. Denial, prayer, and weather talk. But some doors now had crosses carved into them, and no one entered the Hollow. Except once. Mrs. Flannery was seen walking toward it just after dusk, holding a bundle wrapped in red cloth. She returned with empty hands and a satisfied smile. When asked, she said only, "The field remembers what it's owed." It began in hushed voices behind church pews and over teacups and cracked porcelain. Just 6 days after the body was found, Barrow Fell's heartbeat was no longer marked by the church bell, but by rumor. By Tuesday, Miss Henrietta Glade, who managed the general store and prided herself on knowing everyone's kin, had begun asking customers if they'd noticed anything off about the weather. "No frost on my windows," she said, "but the butter's been going solid in the cellar by mid-morning." Her statement might have meant little had it not been repeated, nearly word for word, by 2 other shopkeepers by week's end. Wells were freezing on the inside, not the surface. Milk spoiled before dawn. And a stray dog, usually bold enough to bark at wind, was found whimpering beside the postbox, having bitten off its own tail. That same week, the priest at St. Alwyn's received a letter. No name or no return address, just a scrap of rough parchment sealed with candle wax and left in the vestibule during morning mass. The handwriting, though uneven, was clear. "The Hollow is older than us, older than the stones. We built over hunger and called it sanctuary, but the field keeps count, and we are far behind in payment." Father Wilton, a pragmatic Anglican with little taste for theatrics, burned the letter, quietly. The people of Barrow Fell lived in pockets, not rows. The settlement had grown unevenly since 1743, when the first sawmill was built along the Elmbury stream. Families staked land where the stone would yield. Distance between homes bred a certain autonomy and secrecy. By 1839, the town had 87 registered households, a post station, a school with one overworked schoolmaster, and 2 churches, St. Alwyn's, Anglican, and the Chapel of Mercy, Wesleyan. They also had 3 taverns, though only one, the Lark's Bell, remained in continuous use. It was here that whispers were loudest. Benedict Triggs, the Lark's keeper, was a retired Navy man with a mouth like damp rope and a memory sharper than glass. He'd fought in the Battle of Navarino and survived the burning decks of the HMS Albion, but he swore to anyone who would listen that what now stalked Barrowfell was worse than war. "There's no honor in it," he muttered to a group of sheep farmers nursing mid-strength ale. "No pattern, no cause." Just taking the room had gone quiet. Then a voice from the shadows asked, "Taking what?" Benedict paused, then said simply, "Anything that tries to understand it." One woman, however, refused to cower behind rumor. Agnes Kemberley, widow of the late gravedigger Thomas Kemberley, lived in a red-brick cottage at the town's eastern edge. 62, blind in one eye, and twice fined for public heresy. She was known for speaking in blunt tones and for her habit of leaving meat out for crows. On the 10th day after the discovery, she visited Constable Garvey in his office with a bundle wrapped in a flour sack. "Found this in my attic," she said, placing it on the desk. "Don't know whose hands it passed through before mine, but it's dated 1792. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, cracked spine, moth-eaten corners, the ink almost faded to dust. On the front was embossed a single phrase, Field Wards, Assessment and Recovery. It wasn't listed in the parish archives. The first few pages appeared financial, tallies of wheat stores, wool weight, and sheep births. But further in, the tone shifted. March 14th found markers at western edge, iron nails placed head upward in triangle, soil around them soft, though no rain for 3 days. Removed them. Cold followed. April 9th, young Edwin Beale vanished near the ridge. Boots found, left foot full of blood, right boot dry. No tracks beyond that. April 11th, Pastor Little insists it's Old Testament rot, but his daughter's gone glassy-eyed and will not stop humming that hymn. Agnes pointed to a symbol drawn beside the last entry, a vertical eye with lashes on both ends and a stitched arc beneath it. "I've seen that scratched into the back of the fireplace stone," she said. "My husband never said why." Garvey, pale, asked to keep the book. Agnes agreed. "But don't bury it again," she warned. "Barrowfell's memory is short." That's how this always starts. The town council, a loose body of 5 local men who met every fortnight in the schoolhouse, debated whether to address the field in their next meeting. Thomas Wainwright, a corn merchant and acting chair, insisted on silence. "We are not a town of superstition," he said. "Let us remain one of productivity." But Edith Clough, the schoolmaster's wife, spoke up from the back pew. She asked, "When's the last time you saw your shadow at the hollow?" No one answered. Among the many who began to murmur behind closed doors, one voice stood apart. Not for volume, but for precision. Jonathan Sell, the town's youngest clockmaker, kept to himself. 29 years old, thin as his own tweezers and known for repairing pocket watches without charging widows, he was generally liked. But he had a flaw. He listened too closely. On September 20th, he posted a small notice outside his shop. "Call for attention. I've taken measurement of the hollow's perimeter every morning for the last 6 days. My fixed stakes now stand closer together by 4.5 inches total. Soil has not moved. Stones have not shifted. And yet, the field contracts he signed it, J. Sell, Watchman." 2 days later, a fire started in his workshop. No other structure was touched. The blaze burned hot enough to warp iron. The interior of the safe, locked from the outside, was charred, but the outside paint was untouched. Jonathan's cell was never found. Only a single object remained undamaged, a silver stopwatch, lid open, the minute hand twitching back and forth between 03 and 04. Evening services at both churches saw a brief rise in attendance, but the sermons took on a mechanical air. Scripture was read, but the congregation's eyes rarely moved. The words seemed powerless in the face of a horror with no name. On the 21st, Father Wilton received a visitor from Wexley. Archdeacon Cyril Norridge, a man with a soft jaw and severe hands, had arrived by carriage. He wore a white collar and a silver cross, but asked no questions about the faith of the town. He asked instead to see the field. Father Wilton advised against it, but the archdeacon insisted. He was seen standing at the hollow's edge for precisely 7 minutes. He did not step in. He said nothing as he returned to his carriage. That night he left a letter in Father Wilton's vestry drawer. Only one passage bore underlining. There are fields that predate even the Scripture. In those days, flesh was tribute, and those who did not pay built churches. The letter was unsigned. By the final week of September, Barrowfell no longer spoke in public. There were no children in the streets, no bells. The livestock at Cratchley Farm refused to eat. The sheep bleated but did not wander. Horses bucked at unseen flies. The sky remained stubbornly clear, though no sun warmed the ground. People had begun to carve odd symbols into their doors, eyes, teeth, spindled shapes like trees split by lightning. Some were copied from old gravestones, others had no known source. And once, at dusk, a low hum was heard rising from the hollow, not loud, not melodic, but layered, like many voices speaking just beneath the soil, mouths full of earth. When Dr. Bell examined the brass buckle again, the one found near the flayed corpse, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Not with his eyes, but with his tongue. A taste. Copper, but also salt. And something bitter, like charred mint. He licked the metal again. The flavor was gone. But the bitterness remained in his teeth for a week. And at night, his dreams became textured. Red cloth, a woman's hands, a field that kept breathing. Before there was a field, there was a house, and before the house, there was the Tern family. The structure at 19 Hollow Ridge Lane stood, perhaps 200 yards from the western border of what was now called the Flaying Field. A modest cottage by modern standards, it was built in 1801 of uneven stone and timber from the Elmbury banks. Its windows were small, deeply recessed. No chimney smoke had risen from it in nearly 3 years. The last known occupant was Miss Liddy Tern, unmarried, aged 37. Daughter of the reclusive archivist Elliot Tern and the late Rebecca Tern, née Baines, who died during a difficult birth in 1802, her own obituary listing only wound of the inner self as cause of death. No midwife had ever claimed credit or responsibility. Liddy was rarely seen, even in youth. Some remembered a quiet girl with pale fingers who sketched grave markers in charcoal. Others claimed she spoke backwards when startled. What was known for certain was this: the Terns had long been record keepers. In 1825, Elliot Tern had been appointed Custos Annalium Barrowfelliensis, a ceremonial post that allowed him to privately maintain the town's deep archives in exchange for a modest stipend and exemption from parish tax. He accepted and promptly withdrew from public life. By 1827, he no longer attended church. By 1830, he no longer walked into town, and in 1832, his name was quietly removed from the census by Clerk Harrow after the sheet was returned with one line added, "Here there is no need for counting. All names are accounted. All names are already known." Signed, Eltern, when Constable Garvey received a request to investigate the house, he resisted at first. "Superstition," he said. "Witch chasing." But after Jonathan Sell's disappearance and the ledger from Agnes Kemberley, the house became unavoidable. He chose Dr. Bell and young Robert Harrow, nephew of the town clerk, to accompany him. They arrived on the morning of October 1st, 1839. The house, though weather-worn, was untouched by vandalism. Ivy grew only on its rear. The gate hung askew but not broken. Birds did not land on the roof. The air smelled of pepper and mildew. Bell remarked the front door bore an odd groove, just below the knocker, a perfect circle, etched shallowly. Not decorative, not functional, just there. Inside they found stillness. Not dust, oddly, but stillness. The floors were swept, the hearth unlit but clean. And on a far wall, 15 ledger books were stacked in precise order, each bearing a handwritten label. Turn, Observations of Motion, Volume 1 to 15. Volume. I was dated 1805. Volume 15, 1838. Robert Harrowy read from the last, April 4th. The field has reduced its hum to 9 beats per 60 seconds. This aligns with the onset of fast bloom. I suspect the marrow stirrings will soon reach ceiling shadows. April 11th. Father speaks through mirrors only. His jaw no longer moves. He asks about the final peal but offers no explanation. I declined to fetch the needle. April 12th. I stitched my shadow back today. It had loosened from the toes. No further entries. In the bedroom, they found a bed made tightly with flax-stuffed linens, untouched for what seemed years. A small porcelain doll sat on the sill, facing out toward the field. Its eyes were made of real glass, but its scalp was bare. Threads where the hair had once been sewn were frayed, as if something had picked at them gently for years. Dr. Bell discovered a single object beneath the bed, a tin container the size of a hat box, latched but not locked. Inside were swatches of fabric, old, rotted in places, but folded with care. Each had a tag pinned to it. Written in faded ink, Thomas Beale, 8 years. 1819, Ruth Ellen Wick, 1822, unspoken, M. Undated. Mine, twice. The fabric pieces were all the same shape, rounded corners, roughly rectangular, like small shawls or patches. Garvey turned the last one over. There was a single pin still stuck through it, tarnished, blood dark. The attic held more answers, though none were welcome. Robert Harrow, youngest and lightest, climbed the narrow ladder first. His voice caught before his head breached the hatch. "Don't come up yet." When asked why, he simply said, "It's wrong." When the others ascended, they saw why. The attic had no windows, only a sloped roof and beams lined with symbols etched into soot. Vertical eyes, inverted hourglasses, and a repeating motif of a hand missing its skin, bone lines drawn in red chalk. In the center sat a chair facing nothing. On it, a single hairbrush, and beside it, a sheet of paper nailed to the floor. "Do not flay what is already flayed." Skin is the first lie. What comes next is nearer to truth. The signature was a single mark, a spiral, cracked by a vertical line. Constable Garvey, disturbed but unmoved, ordered the house sealed. But Bell returned alone that night. He entered through the rear, and in the dark he opened the fireplace flue. Inside he found a bundle, red cloth, tied with black string. Inside that, a letter, dated 1836, to whomsoever seeks. I have not gone mad, though madness may be a softer path. The field does not kill, it remembers, it reclaims what was borrowed. My father spoke with the watchers beyond bark and breath, and they asked him for the ledger of skin. He declined. I accepted. Do not seek me. I am already part of the counting, when the wind shivers east and the soil will not swallow light. Close the books. Close them, or you will hear the peeling begin. Bell burned the letter, but not before transcribing its final lines, and he never told Garvey what he'd found. In the weeks following the visit, townspeople began to see Liddy, not fully, not face to face, but reflected, in rain puddles, in the darkened glass of shop windows, in the mirror hung behind the lock's bell bar, where 3 witnesses said the same thing on different days. She was brushing her hair, even though every record said she had none. The Tern family home was eventually removed from the town registry. It did not collapse, nor was it demolished. It simply began to sink. Each month, the ground around it sloped a little steeper. By winter, the door frame was at chin height, and then, in spring, it was gone. All that remained was the porch and the doll, its scalp now covered in moss. The first truly public horror occurred at precisely 4:06 p.m. on October the 13th, 1839. It was a Sunday, and the town square was unusually full for that time of year. A traveling preacher from Cragley had come bearing copies of a new hymn book, and with him a small retinue of street singers, 2 women, 1 boy, who performed verses about Jonah and redemption to light tambourine. Several dozen villagers were gathered. Some bought toffee, others watched. Then Ruth Ellicott began to scream. Ruth was 15. Known for her quiet temperament and her long red plaits, which her mother took care to braid tight each morning with black thread. She was standing near the fountain, biting into a honey loaf, when her back arched sharply. Not from the spine, but the skin. Witnesses described it as lifting, as if something invisible had grabbed hold of her back by 2 points between the shoulder blades and begun pulling upward, slow and deliberate. She screamed again, this time louder, and her hands clawed at the air. The loaf dropped, her braid snapped. Then, without warning, her eyes rolled back and her voice changed. Not a scream now, not even words, just sound. Guttural, layered, like a rusted door hinge mixed with an animal's last breath. Some claimed the voice came not from her throat, but from inside her skin. Others later said it wasn't her voice at all, but the field speaking through her. When it ended, she collapsed. Her back was unharmed. No tears, no redness, no mark, but a ring of frost had appeared around her feet, 12 inches wide, forming a perfect circle on the sun-warmed cobblestone. The preacher fled without collecting his coin. Dr. Bell was summoned. He found Ruth conscious, seated in a chair at the schoolhouse with a wool blanket around her. Her fingers trembled. "What did you feel?" he asked. Ruth looked at him with eyes that were no longer soft. "I didn't feel anything," she whispered. "I saw it." "What did you see?" Her reply was instant. A face in the dirt. It had skin that wasn't skin, and it smiled like it remembered me. The frost remained for 3 days. It did not melt, even under sunlight. On the 4th morning it was gone, evaporated entirely. Not a trace of moisture. That night, Ruth's father nailed shut all windows in the house. Events began to quicken. October 17th. The bells of St. Alwyn's rang by themselves at 2:11 a.m., though the ropes had been removed a year prior for repair. October 19th. The chapel organist, Elijah Booth, was found weeping inside the confessional, muttering that his own reflection had asked to trade places. October 20th. A letter was discovered nailed to the lich gate of the cemetery. Not parchment this time, not ink. The letter was written on human skin. The text was burned in, not carved, and the smell of scorched salt clung to it. Its words were few. "When the count is broken, the field opens its second mouth." Constable Garvey ordered it destroyed immediately. But Father Wilton made a tracing first. He found that the symbol at the bottom, the cracked spiral, matched one carved into the attic of the Tern house. Dr. Bell, who had become the town's reluctant chronicler, began to compile what he called the Second Ledger. It contained excerpts, observations, and sketches of the strange events. One entry read, "Ruth Ellicott, age 15. Pupils return to normal, though light causes her pain. Refuses to eat root vegetables. Keeps rearranging spoons into triangles. When asked why, she says, 'So they don't peel me too.'" Another. "Dead crows found behind post house. No wounds, but their feathers arranged in neat spiral fans. 11 birds." 11 days since Liddy's house disappeared, Bell did not share the ledger with anyone. He hid it inside the hollow of the old pulpit at the abandoned Wesleyan chapel. Only one person knew its location. At this time, the people of Barrowfell began to remember something that had been forgotten. In the town schoolhouse, a faded map hung on the north wall. Drawn in 1775, it listed the fields not by parcel number, but by name. The hollow was then called Second Share. And to its east, just beyond where the ground sloped unnaturally, was another name, the Peelings. No current field bore that title. In fact, no land registry after 1803 listed any such name at all. Clerk Harroway, when confronted, said only, "We lost some fields during the reckoning." When asked to explain the phrase, he looked at the floor. The soil moved. The records didn't. Then came October 23rd. It was late morning when the twins, Imelda and Catherine Marston, age 8, were playing with a rag doll near the hedgerow that borders the hollow. Their mother, Marjorie, was preparing bread and had left the door open so she could call them in before the dough cooled. At 11:15 a.m. she heard Imelda scream, but it was not pain. It was joy. Then silence. When Marjorie ran outside, she found both girls seated in the grass. Catherine was still, pale and sweating. Imelda was humming, rocking back and forth, whispering words into the doll's ear. What she said was later repeated in the presence of Father Wilton and Dr. Bell. "We saw the parade. We saw them peel the sky. They said it's almost time. We get to choose." "Choose what?" asked Wilton. Imelda looked up with a smile that did not belong to an 8-year-old. "Which side of the skin we live on?" Catherine did not speak for 6 more days. When she did, she asked only, "Why are the trees upside down?" That evening, Dr. Bell returned to the field. Alone. He stepped exactly 12 paces in. The soil was dry firm. He took out a pocket watch, set it on the ground, and backed away. The next morning, the watch was still there. But the time had changed. It now ticked backwards. The field had begun to breathe. Not literally, but the grass moved in still air. The earth pulsed underfoot when no one walked, and those who stood near it for too long reported a pressure behind the eyes. A sound like breathing through cloth. Constable Garvey finally permitted a barrier to be built, a fence of ash wood, blessed by both priests. Small bells hung from the posts. Iron nails were hammered in crosswise. An old folk practice meant to bind land to silence. The fence did not last a week. One morning, every nail had turned inward, as if the field had drawn them in with invisible force. The bells were gone entirely. No sound, no shards, just wire twisted into shapes like roots. On October 27th, Ruth Ellicott vanished. She was last seen walking barefoot toward the Turn House ruins. Her footprints stopped exactly 5 feet from where the porch had once stood. There were no drag marks, no signs of struggle, just one small handprint in the frost-covered grass, facing upward, and a braid of red hair laid across it. Barrowfell had seen hunger, plague, and the war-tax winter of 1809, but never this kind of silence. It was not the calm of recovery, it was the hush of expectation. Something unspoken had coiled around the town's edge. Not just fear, obedience. After Ruth Ellicott's disappearance, the streets emptied even during daylight. Windows were boarded. Doors were locked with wire, not latches. and white chalk marks, circles with a single vertical stroke, began appearing on door frames, even those of the clergy. No one admitted to drawing them, but no one wiped them off either. By October 31st, Halloween by the old calendar, 8 residents had fled Barrowfell entirely. The Bramley family abandoned their farmland with livestock still tethered. Mr. Andrew Jennings, a blacksmith who once mocked the Tern name in public, simply vanished. His workshop was found with all tools polished and stacked. His apron hung neatly on a nail, and on the floor a perfectly folded square of human skin. It had no seams, no cuts, no blood. Just one faint inscription burned into the surface. Voluntary yield. Dr. Bell examined the flesh and determined it to be roughly the area of a human back, including the shoulders. He placed it inside a sealed jar and locked it in the cold room behind St. Olwen's, marking it only with the word, "Witness." 3 days later, the jar was found empty, the seal unbroken. Not everyone fled. Some turned inward, to prayer, to ritual, but a few tried to fight. One was Eliza Murren, wife of the groundskeeper at the Barrowfell schoolhouse. A former nurse in the cholera years, she was not prone to hysteria. She began keeping watch over the hollow from her second-floor window, taking notes hourly. At 2 a.m. on November 3rd, she recorded the following. A procession of figures, barefoot, skin glistening, though I cannot tell if wet or peeled, passed through the field in perfect silence. 8 of them. The last one turned and looked directly at my window. No face. But the eye, the single eye, was on the shoulder. The next morning, her notes were found scattered on the floor. Eliza herself was discovered in her attic, unconscious, uninjured, but her lips had been stitched shut with horsehair thread. No tools or blood were found. The stitching was precise. 6 clean crosses. She never spoke again. Constable Garvey, though visibly shaken, attempted to maintain civic order. He doubled the watch, stationed men near the cemetery and at the crossroads, and declared an informal dusk curfew. Bell suggested they leave entirely. Harrow offered to petition the magistrate in Wexley for formal intervention, but Garvey said only, "If we leave now, we won't get to leave." Then he sat down, lit a pipe he never smoked, and asked for a Bible. Not to read it, just to hold it. November 5th, Gunpowder Night. There were no fireworks, no children lit sparklers, but something exploded. Shortly after midnight, a blast shook the eastern edge of town, the Tern property. When locals rushed to the hill, they found not flames, but a crater. The earth had opened in a perfect spiral, 20 feet across, descending in a staircase of smooth, dry clay. The steps were not man-made. There were no tool marks. At the center lay a single item, a red shawl folded, untouched by dust, smelling faintly of wax and iron. It was Liddy Tern's. Dr. Bell descended only once. When he returned, he could not speak for hours. Later in his ledger he wrote, "The clay is not clay, it's preserved skin, too thin for burial wrapping, too smooth for animal. The smell is inside me now. I heard breathing from the walls." The red shawl was not folded. It was being folded. He never returned to the site, but the hole remained. Each day a new step appeared. By November 9th, it was 30 steps deep. Then it filled with water, black, still, odorless. Even the flies refused to land. On the same day, a schoolboy named Fletcher Rowe disappeared. He was last seen drawing in the margins of his arithmetic primer. When the teacher asked him what he was sketching, he replied, "The flaying begins with the prayer." The drawing showed a face, but the skin was drawn beneath it, like a mask turned inside out. The primer was found beneath his desk. A single note was written on the back cover. "Let them listen. Let them kneel." No trace of Fletcher has ever been found. By mid-November, fear had changed shape. It was no longer fear of the field. It was fear of each other. Children began waking in the night, whispering words they did not understand. The marrow bellows. The root wants out. It's inside the skin now. It watches from underneath. One mother took her family into the woods and set fire to her home. The fire burned blue. No other homes were touched, but in the ash, a single footprint remained. Bare, small, facing into the fire. November 17th, Constable Garvey went missing. He left no note. His badge was found hanging from the gate of the field, spinning slowly though there was no wind. Dr. Bell wrote in his ledger, "It has begun choosing. Not those who trespass, but those who seek to understand one woman did not flee. Agnes Kemberley, the widow who brought the old ledger. She remained in her cottage, windows shut, fires burning hot even at noon. When asked why she stayed, she said, 'I was born in the counting. I will die in it.' On November 21st, smoke was seen rising from her chimney. But by dawn, the house was cold. She was found seated in her chair, eyes open, mouth sealed with wax. Her left hand held a needle, her right a piece of stitched cloth. It was skin, not hers, but marked with her name. And a second, faded one. W.H., 1833. The same initials as the buckle found near the first flayed corpse. That night, something new happened. A sound rolled through the hollow, not breath, not wind, but a peal. A bell, deep and hollow, not from any steeple, from the soil, one toll only. But it echoed for minutes. People said they felt it in their teeth. And then the dreams began. Everyone, all at once. They spoke of hands, hundreds, reaching through clay, offering pieces of skin, not violently, patiently, as if returning coats once borrowed. And always, the same phrase was whispered as the dream ended. The flaying is not pain. It is memory Dr. Bell stopped sleeping altogether. He wrote his final entry on November 26th. I believe we are not being punished. We are being remembered. This field is not cursed. It is counting backward, returning what was promised, what was once given and now reclaimed. Every child knows the rhyme. We just forgot its shape. Flay not to bleed, but to birth. There are more names to peel, including mine. Then the ink runs off the page. No more entries follow. The first true clue, an explanation masquerading as a document, surfaced not in Barrowfell, but in a box mislabeled Mineral Assessments, Wexley Parish, 1770 to 1800. It was discovered on December 3rd, 1839, by a junior archivist named Cyril Datch, who had been assigned to audit the crumbling east wing of the Wexley Registry House after a leak had damaged 3 shelves of probate logs. Datch was not from Barrowfell. In fact, he had never heard of the place. But he paused when a sheaf of paper, bound with gut string and sealed with an old wax mark, slipped free from the pile. The wax bore a strange emblem, a spiral flanked by 2 vertical eyes, and beneath them the Latin phrase, Memoria subcute, memory beneath the skin. Inside were 12 pages, handwritten in an archaic tight scroll. No signature, no date, but every margin bore a numbering system. Peel count, ledger B. The eye contents were chilling. The first page read, Fields designated second share and peelings now confirmed as ritual ground. Markings date to pre-Norman lattice script. Anthropodermic codices recovered in 1741 proved insufficient in appeasement. Peelings required every 3rd generation. The next pages were more technical, descriptions of skin samples, burial rituals, incantations phrased as agricultural records. One entry described a marrow ledger, a concept never previously documented in regional superstition. The marrow keeps count. The field absorbs remembrance not in bone but in the layers removed. Yielding is necessary. Willingness is recorded in the peel. The 8th page listed surnames. Wick Beale, Turn Ellicott, Kemberley Garvey, all Barrowfell families. The final page offered only one line. When the count breaks, the skin of the land is peeled back, and memory walks again. Datch brought the document to his supervisor, who ordered it sent to the magistrate's office. It never arrived. That night, the east wing of the registry collapsed. Fire was blamed, though no flame was ever seen. The original document was lost. But Datch, disturbed and unable to sleep, had made a copy. Back in Barrowfell, the town was now half occupied. No carts entered, no post left. The hollow had grown. It now bled into 3 adjacent fields, absorbing fence lines and stone markers. Livestock refused to graze within 100 yards. Some villagers placed crosses in the soil, others bone fragments or locks of hair. Nothing stopped the spread. At the center of the field, the spiral crater had risen again, no longer a pit, now a mound, earthen, breathing, and atop it sat a wooden chair, empty, waiting. Then came the confession, not written, not spoken, carved. Father Wilton, in a desperate search for answers, had begun combing the chapel's stone foundations for signs of structural damage after tremors were felt during his sermons. Behind the altar, beneath a panel once used for ash storage, he found an inscription, etched into the stone with a sharp blade. 6 lines. We took their skin as relic. We hid it beneath the floor. The field forgave once, then twice. The 3rd will birth the memory whole. We are the flayers now. The stone bore initials at the bottom, R.H.W.H., Robert Harrower, and W.H., whose initials matched both the buckle found in the field and the stitched cloth held by Agnes Kemberley. Father Wilton ordered the floor beneath the altar lifted. What he found was not stone, but a skin-bound book. This new volume, its pages dry, tough, edges brittle, contained only 11 entries. The ink was a brownish red. The penmanship was elegant. Each entry described a selection, a time, a method, a victim, a purpose. Page 1. Year 1767. Boy-child, name withheld. Taken in sleep, skin offered in lieu of plague spread. Result, 2 mild winters, grain stores doubled. Page 4. Year 1801. Turn woman, unbaptized. Taken. Via mirror ritual. Skin yielded easily. No struggle. Result, hollow silent for 5 years. Page 9. Year 1833. W.H. offered self-marked flesh to delay counting. Field accepted but warned. Next collection must be public. Witnessed. Remembered. Page 11. Year 1839. Memory breaks. Peel count incomplete. Chair must return. Father Wilton brought the book to Dr. Bell. But Bell was gone. Only his final note remained, written directly on the wall of his cold room in charcoal. The field asked me to remember. So I peeled what was false. Underneath was not pain, but memory. The chair on the mound never moved, but by December 7th, people claimed to see it occupied at night. Not by a person, but a form, like cloth stretched over invisible wire. It moved only when not watched. One boy described it as a skin that sits. Another claimed it hummed. And in that hum, the names of the dead returned. Not shouted, whispered, folded, like receipts kept too long in a ledger pocket. At the Barrowfell schoolhouse, a cache of records was found behind the blackboard. Old notes, unsubmitted student essays. Among them, a single folded paper marked "Do not grade." Inside was a child's handwriting, precise and clean. We all came from one skin. It wrapped us before the walls were built. We are just its flakes. The field is not hungry. It is curious. It wants to see what the skin saw. The author was unnamed. But the date, February 1819, was the same year 2 children had vanished in the hollow. Wexley authorities were eventually notified, but not by letter, by absence. Barrow Fell had stopped sending tax reports, stopped logging census data, stopped requesting deliveries. A constable from Wexley was dispatched on December 12th. He did not enter the town, but from the ridge he saw the field, and in it rows of pale figures, not standing, not walking, laid out, side by side, skinless, glistening, and watching him. He turned back immediately. His report simply read, "Barrow Fell is no longer a parish. It is a memory being restitched. One final record survives." Datch's copy of the lost Peel ledger was eventually archived in the private collection of the Brackley College Historical Society in 1887. It was catalogued under rural rituals of pre-Christian Derbyshire. Scholars dismissed it as apocrypha. No parish named Barrow Fell was found on any modern map. No hollow, no ledger, no trace of the town remained after 1840. Only a field, unnamed. But the locals call it the listening ground. The grass there doesn't grow, but the soil never dies. And if you kneel with your ear to the dirt, you can hear the counting. There are no official records of what happened on the night of December 21st, 1839 in Barrow Fell. No census, no parish ledger, no court testimony. Only fragments remain, some carved, some burned, others whispered in the sleep of those who've never stepped foot on northern English soil. But we begin with what can be verified. On the morning of December 20th, a child's voice was heard across the hollow. Multiple witnesses reported the same phrase, spoken in the exact same tone, repeated 5 times between 6:43 and 7:11 a.m. The chair is taken. No one was seen in the field, yet when the wind shifted, the spiral mound was visibly altered. The chair, which for weeks had remained motionless at the summit, was now buried halfway into the soil, as if pulled down by unseen hands, and something else had appeared beside it. A stack of 11 objects, flat, reddish, folded, skin. Later that day, Father Wilton reportedly locked himself inside St. Olwyn's and rang the bell once every 47 minutes. When a townsman finally forced open the church doors, they found the priest standing atop the pulpit, barefoot, eyes bloodshot, repeating a single phrase in Latin, "Memoria fit caro." Memory becomes flesh. He was removed by force and taken to the cold room. He died shortly after midnight, but not from exposure or injury, from absence of skin. A nurse attending him fainted. She had been holding his wrist just moments before and testified that his skin peeled off like wet lace. No blood, no resistance, just departure, as though the skin had let go. At 2:17 a.m., the bells at the Chapel of Mercy rang without wind, and the town began to walk. Not all at once, but in waves. Sleepwalkers, whole families rising from their beds, wordless, barefoot, moving as though called by music no one else could hear. Some carried objects, combs, needles, locks of hair, old garments. Some wore their clothes inside out. Some wore none at all. They walked toward the hollow. Every road, every path, every shortcut that had ever led to that cursed field began to hum with feet. Witnesses, those few who resisted, say it was not a march, not even a ritual. It was a returning. Agnes Kemberley's cottage was found open, though she had died weeks earlier. On her table was a folded note. It peels not out of anger, but to open what we've closed, we sealed ourselves in memory. Now memory is unsealing us. Next to the note was a ledger. The first page simply read, "Final peel, count complete." At 3:04 a.m., a sound rose from the field. Not wind, not breath, but suction, as if a lung the size of the earth had drawn inward, and then the screaming began. Not from the townspeople, from the ground. a high-layered wail that pulsed up through the soil, shaking the hedgerows, knocking icicles from the chapel eaves. The watchers, those few who stayed back, described columns of pale mist rising from the field in spirals. Not smoke, not fog. Mist made of memory. Shapes moved inside it. Some tall, some crawling, some unmistakably human. Dr. Bell's second ledger was recovered weeks later by a team of surveyors sent from Wexley. It had been buried beneath a collapsed section of the cold room. The final pages were soaked but salvageable. The last, complete entry, dated December 21st, 1839, 3:33 a.m., reads, "They are not creatures, not spirits. They are skins that remember. We believed the field wanted blood, but it wanted the casing, the part that bore witness, the shell of all acts. When you skin a town, you reveal what it truly was, and what it still is. The flaying is not a crime. It is the unveiling. No one was found alive in Barrowfell after sunrise. The hollow was empty. No skin, no bodies, no blood. Only clothing, neatly folded in rows, each piece paired with a small object, a ribbon, a tooth, a comb, a wedding ring. The mound was gone. The chair, absent, but in its place, a hollow indentation, 7 feet wide, exactly the size and shape of a seated figure that had grown too large to be human, but still chose to sit. Some say the town never existed, that Barrowfell was a wartime hallucination, a mass delusion born from isolation and damp-lunged grief. But too many documents survive. Too many names appear twice, once in the ledgers, once in the birth registries, and again, decades later, in missing persons cases across England. And then there are the maps. Old Ordnance Survey drafts from the 1820s show a perfectly square field, unlabeled, on land that modern surveys say is impassable peat. But local ramblers disagree. They say the soil is dry there. Too dry. No moss grows, and if you stand in the right light, the earth seems to ripple, like cloth being stitched beneath the surface. The skinless are not gone. That is the final horror, that they were not killed, not erased, but revealed. They are the memory of the town made visible. They are the flayed conscience of Barrowfell, and sometimes when the air is cold enough and the ground stills beneath your boots, you will hear a sound. A voice made of 1,000 voices, pulled like lace through centuries of soil. It will say, "We are the ledger now." And if you listen long enough, you may hear your own name being counted. What remains of Barrowfell now exists only in margins, of ledgers, of land records, and of memory. No official notice of its dissolution was issued. No fire was recorded, no mass exodus observed. Only the quiet cancellation of presence. The town was, then wasn't. And yet, strange echoes endure. The earliest post-event document appears in the Wexley Register of Parish Holdings, dated February 1840. It notes, in script smaller than its surrounding entries, Barrowfell removed from tithe map by order of silence. Ref. Peel Act B3. Unrecorded statute. Parish assets dissolved. Remaining soil unrecoverable. No such act exists in the House of Lords archives. By 1842, surveyor George Hadley was commissioned to replot the area for agricultural reassignment. In his surviving notebook, he wrote, "The land once charted as Barrowfell is impossible to level. Any attempt to mark grid lines distorts within days. Stones reappear where moved. Iron rusts within hours. And at night, sounds beneath the ground imitate hammer and breath." Hadley quit the project after 4 weeks. He would later be committed to St. Kildan's Asylum, found mumbling about folded children beneath the clay. By 1845, a Methodist missionary named Elsie Marsh attempted to settle the perimeter, hoping to convert remaining tenants or squatters. Her diary, donated posthumously to the library of the Society for the Preservation of English Faith Histories, contains entries from March 3rd to March 7th. Then it stops. Final entry. I dreamed last night of a girl with no mouth but a braid of red hair wound around her head like a crown. She pointed to the floor beneath my feet and whispered with her eyes. It still breathed. Her horse was later found near the edge of the peelings. She was not. In 1853, a team of railway engineers attempted to dig a route through the region to shorten the Wexley-Northby junction. By the fourth day, their tools had dulled. Compass needles spun, and one worker, Charles M. Bletch, fell into a shallow cavity and was unable to speak again. He lived, but only wrote the same phrase repeatedly in chalk on his cell walls. The ledger counts in reverse. He died in 1860. His skin was said to peel freely after death, leaving behind flesh that did not rot, but turned to dry parchment. The coroner declined to sign the certificate. The chair was never found again, nor the spiral mound. But the pattern, the counting, was not limited to Barrow Fell. Similar incidents began appearing in folklore across the High Pennines and parts of Lancashire. A chapel in Amblesmere where the choir peeled their lips in unison during Easter rehearsal. A barn in Wickstow where 117 iron nails turned to teeth overnight. A mirror in Leybridge that reflected people's skins a beat behind their movements. Each story was dismissed, each denied connection. But in 1891, folklorist Henry G. Morwood published The Flaying Folklore of Northern England. In it, he described a pattern he called memory skins, the belief that the earth itself could remember suffering, and that certain places were designed to peel away the layers of forgetting. Morwood interviewed a 91-year-old woman in a hospice outside York. She claimed to have once visited Barrowfell as a child, her only memory. The wind came from inside the ground, and I saw my mother's face walking toward me, but she was wearing mine. Of Barrowfell's original 87 households, none have traceable descendants. Genealogical attempts made in the 20th century found birth records but no death records for at least 32 individuals. These included Ruth Ellicott, Fletcher, Rowe, Liddy Turn, Elliot, Turn, Constable, Garvey, Agnes Kemberley, Dr. Horace Bell. Their names reappear nowhere, not in marriage registries, immigration logs, hospital admissions, nor death ledgers, as though they were peeled from history. One last document surfaced in 1937. An archivist for the British Geological Survey named Daniel Hayes was assigned to digitize regional land maps from the 19th century. He discovered a set of wax-stamped folders buried in a mislabeled box from the Registry of Deconsecrated Grounds. Inside were aerial sketches, drawn in ink and charcoal, dated December 1839. From above, the sketches clearly depict rows in the hollow, not of crops, of folded shapes, laid out like ledgers. One bears a chilling annotation in the lower margin, flayed not as punishment, but as punctuation. The field ends with Skin Hayes submitted the sketches to his supervisor. They were deemed non-cartographic and destroyed. But Hayes had taken photographs. He sent copies to the National Folklore Archives, where they were filed under unexplained agricultural anomalies. They were never digitized. Today, Barrowfell does not appear on any modern map. The land exists, but only as designated unfit soil, Section 19D, rejected for development. Coordinates exist, but GPS signal is often interrupted there. Amateur hikers report nothing unusual, except a pressure behind the eyes, a metallic taste, and occasionally the sound of paper being turned beneath their feet. Some have seen a child's red braid caught on a bramble. Others swear they heard their own name whispered in the soil. No mass grave was ever found, no epidemic recorded, only silence, and a field that refuses to die. Final entry, unconfirmed report. Date, April 12, 2023. Source, unverified. An independent researcher hiking through the high Pennines took a photograph of a collapsed stone wall with the phrase scratched into the stone, "All skin remembers." She later posted a single message online before deleting her account. "The chair is back." Barrowfell is not a story. It is a scar, not on the body, but on memory itself. And though the town is gone, its ledger continues. Not on paper, on people. Every story remembered becomes a stitch, and every stitch brings the field closer to waking. So next time you walk through a place with no birds, no echoes, and ground that seems too flat for comfort, ask yourself, what do I remember that I shouldn't? And then, what remembers me? In 1996, a retired archivist named Eleanor Tunstall discovered an unlabeled folio while inventorying the damp sub-basement of the Sharrow Lane Records Annex in North Yorkshire. She wasn't looking for folklore. She was cataloguing water-damaged diocesan transfer files. What she found instead was a single sheet of vellum, old but not brittle. Hand-stitched at the corners, the edges darkened with age and sealed with thin black wax. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was legible. It read, "For as long as the soil holds skin, the earth will remember." The flaying is not cruelty. It is archival. Beneath this line were 38 names, Barrowfell's surnames, in alphabetical order. The final name, Wilton H. Rector. The ink trailed off mid-stroke as if the scribe had been interrupted. On the reverse side, a faint drawing, what appeared to be a human back, flayed and flattened, with fine ink annotations labeling each ridge of the spine as a volume. Each scapula, chapter, the skin itself, index. Tunstall submitted the find to the Royal Historical Society, where it was reviewed, photographed, and sealed in archival plastic. The report filed by the reviewing committee concluded, "The item appears to be a symbolic artwork referencing rural mythos, likely fabricated in the 19th century for a ritual or folkloric purpose. No corroborating town named Barrowfell has been found. Recommend cataloguing under superstition." Unconfirmed settlements. Tunstall, however, was not satisfied. She began researching Barrowfell independently, devoting the last years of her life to it. Before her death in 2002, she compiled a 48-page dossier of local legends, archived correspondence, and unlisted burial plots near Ashcroft Moor, 5 miles northeast of Wexley. She mailed the dossier to a colleague. It arrived postmarked but unopened. The envelope had been perfectly resealed. Inside, the dossier was blank, every page white except one. Memory is skin. Every time we tell this story, we remove another layer. Since then, Barrowfell has appeared only in whispers, never in official books, never in census, but it has persisted. It appears in footnotes, in odd death entries marked missing, presumed peeled. In land deeds where the soil classification is listed as memory-retentive clay. In poems written by children who've never heard of the place but draw chairs sinking into spiral earth. In the 2020 excavation near the old Wexley Moorline Road, where workmen uncovered a buried stone circle containing no bones, only teeth. 32 per circle. Each one human, each one set in spiral pattern. They reported hearing pages turning beneath the ground for days after. Work was halted. No report filed. Then, in 2021, a grainy photo appeared on an obscure folklore forum. It showed a field, flat, grey, empty, except for one feature, a wooden chair, upright, half sunk in the earth. The user account that posted it was deleted within hours, but the file name contained a date, 21_12_1839.jpg, and the metadata listed GPS coordinates not in Yorkshire, but further north near the Lancaster Vale Cut Bank, a historically unplottable zone. No such date in that format would have applied to the 19th century. But the location roughly matches where Barrow Fell would have once stood. What, then, are we to believe? Did a village vanish? Did its skin peel willingly? Was there ever a field that remembered? The records are fragmented, unverifiable, the events impossible by modern standards, and yet the names return, the patterns emerge, and the chairs appear. Always the chair, uncarved, waiting. Some folklorists believe Barrow Fell is a metaphor, a rural England cautionary tale about guilt, memory, and historical silence. A parable of secrecy, perhaps, from a time of land enclosures and ecclesiastical corruption. Others believe it is a viral narrative, a story told so many times in whispers and warnings that it etched itself into the cultural skin of the North, like a tattoo done in fire and forgetting. And a few believe the town still exists, just underneath. Not underground, under us. Beneath the skin of the world, beneath the layers of denial and record-keeping and civil order, there is a field, still breathing, still counting, and when the count reaches its next threshold, it will open again. Not with thunder, with a whisper, with a mirror, with a chair. One final note. In 2023, a shortwave radio operator based in Northumberland picked up a broadcast at 3:04 a.m., the same hour the chair reportedly disappeared into the earth in 1839. The signal repeated a single word every 47 seconds, not in English, but in a dialect of Old Church Latin that, when translated loosely, meant unskin. The operator, not knowing what it meant, posted a recording to a folklore server. It was promptly deleted. But the waveform analysis revealed a hidden sound layered beneath the Latin. It was a bell, deep, distant, and pulsing. So what remains of Barrow Fell? No streets, no homes, no bones. Just the story, a story with no author. Only a listener? And if you've read this far, traced the spiral, turned each page, you may now carry a layer of it, just beneath your own, a page folded, a name counted, a stitch already begun. And still, every solstice, every December 21st, somewhere beneath frost and quiet skies, the field shifts, and the soil remembers your shape.